This month, I have been putting up some quotes in my Instagram grid that have to do with attachment. But I've realized that I haven't really explained what it is and what it has to do with parenting, what it has to do with Montessori, and why it's so important to me. So I want to start by kind of backtracking a little bit and explaining attachment in a nutshell. It is a very in-depth theory, and it goes way beyond what most of us here in the West have come to know about attachment, which is, infants, right? It's the parent-child bonding during the infant stage through the toddler years, and that's where most people leave it. But the reality is that attachment is a much bigger and kind of lifelong idea. Attachment is the natural process that helps us to figure out who we are as individuals. Through the process of attachment, we get our bearings. We understand our values. Attachment, you can think of it as a compass, right? It helps children grow up knowing in which direction to point their lives. The roadblock in this process of attachment comes when children start taking their attachment cues from their peers and not from the adults in their life. Children don't have the moral compass. Children don't have the life experience or the value system in place yet that they can transmit to other children, right? So when these children attach to other children, where are they getting these messages, these so-called values from? Well, they're getting it from pop culture. They're getting it from the commercial messages. They're not getting it from the ancestral wisdom that has been passed down to us from generations. And so this is what Dr. Neufeld called peer orientation. Basically, what happens in peer orientation is, you have the child, and the child is supposed to be orbiting around the parents, around the adults that matter in the child's life. When this child gets pulled out of that orbit, it naturally seeks another orbit. And so the child starts orbiting around his or her peers. I was a classroom guide at a 6 to 12 classroom, and I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew that there was something wrong. There was something missing. Something just wasn't clicking. Even though I worked with, children who had really stable upbringings, right? They had parents at home, they had money, they had structure, they had a lot of things going for them. There was something in the classroom that wasn't working. And I brought all my positive discipline tools. I loved the children. I followed all the Montessori principles as best as I could in that school setting. But the children weren't peaceful. They weren't interested, for the most part. They weren't interested in just settling down and learning about the world. They didn't have that innocence and that curiosity towards learning that you hear about. And I don't want to generalize. Some children did, but many of them didn't. And there was this sense of insecurity. There was a restlessness among the children. There was an overwhelming focus on status, on who is friends with whom, who likes whom, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, who's the popular guy, who do we emulate, who do we imitate, who do we turn to, who's the leader. And some of this is natural for the age, right? These children are coming out of a very egocentric first plane, or the first 6 years of life, and all of a sudden they realize that they're part of a broader group and they want to understand that group. So there is nothing wrong with that, but this was all encompassing for many of these children. It took me a long time to figure out what was going on. And it wasn't until I read the book, Hold On to Your Kids, that it hit me. What I was seeing in the classroom was peer orientation in action, right? And I'm not saying that the parents had willingly or consciously abandoned their children. Many of us, most of us, are just victims of something that has been coming down the tubes for now, I think it's the third generation, right? So this youth culture, this idea that children and teens are different from adults and therefore should not be kind of under the wing of adults, but should instead have their own culture, their own language, their own way of dressing. All of these ideas really only emerged in the 1960s. Before that, children lived in multi-generational homes. Before that, children experienced a hierarchical structure in their families, a sense of respect, and an understanding on the part of the children that adults were in charge. Now, as we moved away, and rightly so, as we moved away from a parenting approach that was fear-based, that was, that had to do with hitting and with shaming. And as we moved away from that, it seems like the pendulum has swung in the opposite direction. What we are seeing now, and what we've started to see, in the last, 20, 30 years, is parents who have said, I don't want to be that way. I don't want to hit my child. I don't want to shame my child. But now I'm going to swing in the complete opposite direction, and I am going to either not be involved with my child or not set rules or try to be my child's friend, try to be on equal footing with my child. And what that does is it removes this hierarchical structure that children need in order to feel safe. And so what Dr. Neufeld proposes is that, we kind of swing the pendulum back to the middle, where we embrace this more respectful and holistic approach to parenting in terms of, not hitting, not abusing the children, not shaming them. But we have to keep in mind that these children are biologically primed to orientate themselves to a core. And we have to be that core. When they can orient themselves around us, then that uncertainty, that feeling of insecurity goes away. And so it begs to question, why did Dr. Montessori create these multi-age classrooms? Why did she see that it worked in her experience? And why is it no longer working now? What is different? Well, my trainer always told me to take Montessori from a historical perspective. And if you think about it, the first primary classrooms, the first casas, were established in 1907, right? The first elementary experiments or classrooms started during World War II, so late 1930s into the 1940s. The first elementary training center was established in 1957. This was all before families were as fractured as they are today. This was before the first glimmers of youth culture came into being in the 1960s. And so the children that were in those classrooms were adult oriented. Even if they spent hours a day with a bunch of different children of different ages and everything, they were adult oriented, right? At home, they had the grandparents and they had the parents. Even if the parents were working, there were other adults there. And the entire culture respected this idea of a hierarchical transmission of knowledge and values. I mean, I even remember I grew up in kind of a traditional society in Mexico. Part of my childhood was in Mexico. And in Mexico, it was not only acceptable, it was expected for other parents to discipline any child that they saw not behaving in a way that was acceptable to the whole. right? And so if we went out, with a bunch of friends and a bunch of moms somewhere, and if one of us was behaving in a way that was inappropriate, any of those moms had complete authority to come and say, nope, not on my watch. And all the children knew that there were very similar values being shared within that group. Now, fast forward to today, and I grew up in the 1970s, early 1980s. Fast forward to today, as a parent, I've had plenty of experiences where I'm in a playground and a child is misbehaving, doing something that is either unsafe or inappropriate or hurtful to other children or to the environment. And if I step in, chances are pretty great that not only will the child not respond in a way that lets me know that he has heard my words and that he understands that there is a kind of a transmission of values going on. So not only will the child not react that way, but a lot of times the parent will feel offended. The parent will say, like, who are you trying to parent or discipline my child? So there's been this massive shift. And our children are sitting in that void. And so that's what Dr. Montessori didn't have back in the 1940s, right? That is why her mixed age classrooms worked, and a lot of mixed age classrooms nowadays don't. Now, there are mixed age classrooms that do, and those classrooms have certain characteristics, like a really strong group of older children who have been with the same guide for many years and have been mentored and have a strong attachment, a strong orientation to that guide. And that strong orientation allows the other children to understand that, yes, we're all going to orbit around this adult who has our best interests in mind. But that is not something that you see every day and in every classroom. And so what's left is a void, right? An adult who either doesn't have the skills or the understanding, or it hasn't been given the power and authority to step in and set that sense of there is somebody that is kind of driving the bus, right? And so what's left is children that feel insecure, children that feel unsafe, and an environment where they're all just looking to each other to see who they're going to orient themselves around. And so I don't want to leave you in like, this is terrible and you should pull your kid out of school right away. But I did find that, homeschooling was really a powerful solution for us. And what I realized when we started homeschooling was that a lot of families had pulled their children out of school for this same reason. And some of them could articulate it, some of them couldn't, but many of them felt this way. Now, whether your child is in school or homeschools is not as important as what you do at home to ensure that your child is adult oriented, that your child is attached to you. And so there are a couple of things that I want to suggest. And one is to grab the book, Hold On to Your Kids. The earlier you read it, the more that you can do to prevent your child from becoming peer oriented. And now this doesn't mean that they can't have friends. Absolutely they can have friends. But it's one thing to have friends, and it's another thing to take their values and to take their morals and to take their orientation from those friends versus from you. So my first suggestion is the book. If you don't have the book or if you're waiting for it to arrive, Dr. Neufeld has a lot of videos on YouTube, and he also has the Neufeld Institute, which has all sorts of courses and even free resources that you can download, PDFs and such, so that you can get a better understanding of this. I would love to continue chatting about this, and I would love for you to drop any comments where you either had an aha moment or you are nodding your head along, you've experienced this in the past and couldn't quite put your finger on it. Let me know. Let's start a conversation about this.